Today's episode is going to be more like a state of the podcast type offering. I'm going to lay out some changes that I'm planning to bring to the podcast, hopefully to make it better. I appreciate each and every person joining me on this journey. Because of your connection to what I am doing here, I wanted to take a moment to talk to all 7 of you about the future of this podcast. So hang out until after the break, and you'll hear what's coming. Welcome to the Embellish Podcast, where we like to talk about stories. We like to explore how embellishment makes a story better, how it allows us to connect more deeply with both the person telling the story and the subject of the story. Together, we will explore people, products, and places that have a story to tell. We'll navigate through the truths, half-truths, and outright lies, and decide if truthiness even matters. You may have noticed in the intro, it feels like allergies seem to be really whipping up on me. So you'll have to bear with me. Sound will be slightly different. The feeling will be slightly different, and it's going to be a whole lot more nasal today. I want to start with a thank you to the Chill Filtered podcast for the shout out. In their most recent episode, they talked about me a little bit, and I truly appreciate that. I really enjoy what they're doing over there, so if you have an opportunity, go subscribe and download their episodes. They're always really well put together, and they're a fantastic listen. When I developed the idea for this podcast, it originally was intended to be an episodic podcast that I was going to be producing each week. And I had plenty of time to do that a couple of months ago. I had the ability and the means to be able to produce a brand new episode each week. They're pretty short, almost like a Cliff Notes version. You get about 5 minutes per subject. And while I really enjoyed doing it in that fashion, as we approach summer, as we approach spring and summer, my time is getting more and more limited. Transitioning from winter to spring and spring to summer for anybody who is a parent is pretty taxing. It's also taxing for those that are a teacher. And it's more so for parents who are teachers. And while I'm not a teacher, my spouse is. And so life gets a little bit more hectic, which means we're going to have to slow down the pace and the release cycle of this particular podcast. This episode probably won't count towards that every 2-week cycle. So next Friday, I intend to release a new podcast, and I already have the idea for what I want to talk about on it, and that's going to lead me into one of the other changes that I intend to bring forward. One of the things that I'd like to do as I shift to this once every 2 weeks format, this bi-weekly or bi-monthly or however it is that you say that offering, is that I intend to post images of different bottles that might represent the subject that we're going to talk about in the upcoming episode. Whether it be a few days out or a week out, I'm not entirely sure of what the frequency of that is going to be, but I'm doing that with a couple of things in mind. First is it's essentially a teaser to the content that I intend to talk about, but if any of the followers on Instagram or anybody who follows on the podcast anywhere can guess what it is that I intend to talk about, there might just be an opportunity for that person to receive via hand delivery a sample or 3 from the bottles that are going to be in that podcast. What that also means is that I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time hunting and making sure that whatever episode or whatever content that is that I want to cover, I have a bottle or 2 at least to cover the content that I'm going to talk about. So that's going to involve a little bit more of bottle hunting for me. Now, the rest of the episodes that I particularly have planned out, I already have those bottles in my possession. And so it should be relatively simple for the next 2 episodes or 3 episodes to be able to follow through on this particular thing. Ideally, I would like to get those images out the week before the podcast launches, or the week before the episode launches, so that way I would have an opportunity to potentially get the samples to whoever guesses it, if they do, before that podcast actually even airs. It gives them an opportunity to have in hand the thing that I'm going to be talking about. One of the other things that I want to do over on Instagram is I want to begin a campaign called 30 Sips Till Summer. And basically what that is I've noticed that as I collect, and many of you do the exact same thing, I end up with a lot of unopened bottles sitting on my shelf. And while they're fun to look at, it's contrary to the nature of this particular spirit. And so what I've done is I have started with the first day of summer, and I've counted backwards 30 days. And each day during that month, I am going to try to hold myself accountable to the idea that I'm going to open and pour a drink from a new bottle every day. And so that involves 30 new bottles. Now, those of you at home can absolutely follow along. I don't expect that everyone has 30 bottles, and I know that a lot of people have way more than 30 bottles, and maybe all of your bottles are open. But hopefully we can get the hashtag going that is 30 sips till summer, and we can see what everybody is doing as we approach one of the best times of the year for us to be able to kind of be outside and enjoy the spirit and do all of these wonderful things. One of the more difficult things that I'm struggling with is that while this is an episodic nature of a podcast, there is a season in mind here where I intend to produce a certain amount of episodes and put them out, and then take a pause as I regroup and think about what the next year's format is. And I already have some ideas on how I want to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'm not sure, is 10 episodes appropriate? Is 20, 22, is it 12? What is the appropriate time for us to say, okay, we're done with season 1, we're going to move to season 2? And the reason that matters is that in the next season of these particular episodes, my hope is that I can transition to a longer format podcast with guests and interviews. And what season 2 to me looks like is that I can take each one of my episodes and hopefully get one person from that particular episode that I mentioned, or one brand or one representative to come on and talk about that particular idea or that particular product. And so, I've talked about quite a few brands and quite a few people. Hopefully I'm casting a wide enough net that whenever it comes time to start producing season 2, I can capture those ideas and thoughts and bring them to you. While I don't think that the format of what I'm doing is going to die, the short Cliff's Notes version of the conversations and the ideas that I have around brands and products that are interesting to me, things that are not necessarily whiskey related. I have several ideas around things that might be whiskey adjacent or even completely unrelated to whiskey that are just super interesting to me. And so I'm going to continue to try to build up season 1 so I have enough material in season 2 to hopefully follow through on those ideas. But that's sort of where I'm landing right now. I thank you guys for joining me and taking the opportunity out of your day to listen to what it is that I have to say, finding it interesting or not interesting, whatever it is. I'm going to encourage you, or at least ask of you, if you could go out and leave a rating or leave a review on my podcast. That would be incredibly helpful as I'm trying to grow the audience of this. I'm not really sure what the end goal of the podcast is, other than I am doing it as a part of a passion project. If you like it and you think other people might like it as well, please share or review or leave a rating even on Apple Podcasts. That would be fantastic. I'm struggling with finding an appropriate way to close this particular episode. It's only going to probably be less than 10 minutes. There's not a whole lot of conversation around brands or ideas or thoughts, but there's a lot of things that are going to be happening in the next year with this particular podcast. I've got a subscription to Mary and Eve's blind service, and so whenever that starts hitting, I want to talk about that a little bit. I've got a lot of things in play that I want to be able to talk about. I'm hoping to be able to bring on other podcasters, other whiskey YouTube channel folks, other industry folks, anyone that is on social media that really is into this particular spirit. I want to bring them on. I want to have conversations. Because what I've noticed, at least from the particular whiskey podcast that I enjoy the most, they really focus around the idea that whiskey, bourbon, scotch, all of these brown spirits are communal in nature. They're not necessarily meant to be enjoyed in a vacuum. They're meant to help lubricate a conversation, to help form and increase bonds between humankind. And I want to honor that as much as I possibly can in this particular podcast. So while the first season is a lot of just me talking into the ether, I want the second season to be more of a conversation, more of a participation. And if there are any of the listeners out there that are interested in being a part of this as well, absolutely reach out. I would love to have more people on to be able to talk, because it's really difficult, or at least for myself, it's really difficult to feel comfortable crafting out a monologue of 35 or 40 minutes worth of content. But it's really difficult to have a real conversation with another human being that is less than 30 minutes. And those are the ones that are the most interesting, the most most useful to me, and that's the thing that I think that has probably been missing in a lot of people's lives over the last year as we've isolated and done our due diligence to try to maintain a safe and healthy environment for the people around us. We're missing that human interaction, and we see people flocking to social media, to YouTube, to Instagram, to wherever, to be able to have those interactions. And so I want this podcast to grow in the same fashion, to be able to have more of these real and organic conversations with folks. So that's all I have for today. I just wanted to, I felt a little guilty that I haven't put anything out in the last week and a half. I set some goals for myself at the beginning of the year of how I was going to do these things, and while I've achieved most of those with a regular cadence, there's always going to be refinement and tweaking that needs to occur for whatever it is that you're doing. And so this is what this is. This is a season of refinement for this podcast, this episodic nature of conversation. So I appreciate you for joining me. Thanks everyone who downloads and interacts with my content. I hope that maybe it's reaching people who know little to nothing about whiskey and bourbon. Maybe it's reaching people who know a whole lot, and maybe they're learning something new, or it's firming up their understanding of a particular subject. I try to create this with the idea that it's for everyone, just like whiskey.
Thanks for listening to the Embellish Podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure you subscribe. Check out our website at embellishpod.com and follow us on social media at Instagram and Twitter to keep up with what we have going on. If you have an idea about a story we should talk about, send it to us at embellishpod@gmail.com. And remember, whether famous or infamous, a good story mixed with a touch of embellishment makes the food you ate, the drink you drank, and the places you visited just a little more memorable.